What is wrong with you? Why are you blue?
Hello and welcome to Dice Tabletop. My name is Chris and today everything goes wrong. But first let's look at something that did go right. So the oil is now dried on the head from the last video. We can get a much better look now at how that weathering effect is looking. It doesn't look so shiny anymore and I'm really happy with how this has turned out. So this is definitely the weathering direction I'm going to be going with this Imperial build. Now, in the process of getting these armor panels printed out, I have unfortunately had a few failures, but this is going to be a perfect opportunity to use these to test out a few paint schemes that I have in mind. And it is just as well that I have gone ahead and done this first of all, because I got so confused going through this. So, some of you may remember from a previous video that I want to do a Legio Astorum theme to this Titan. It's got a lovely deep blue colour to it, so I'm going to try here Night Blue by Vallejo. Starting off, we're just going to be priming this shield grey and then applying that blue over the top. And after leaving that to dry, I was not happy with how this turned out. It didn't really cover evenly and it also has this weird satin finish to it. I would be able to get it out with a matte varnish, but yeah, there's a real unevenness to the paint that doesn't quite come across on camera. It'll be perfectly fine though for the next experiment, and that is to try masking this up and to replicate how that shield looks on the Legio Astorum Titan. Now, in order to achieve the mirrored effect, I used the rivets as a guide to line up my masking tape, so that way then I'd be able to use the same guides on the other side and create a perfectly mirrored taper into the centre. And whilst doing this, it was really important to push that masking tape as deep into the crevice created by the trim as possible. That's going to stop as much paint bleeding under that masking tape and contaminating our other colour. Now that we're all taped up, we're coming in first with a grey primer because that's going to give us a much better undertone to apply that yellow on top of. After giving that yellow a few hours to make sure it was really dry, it's time to peel this back and see how it looks. I am really happy with how this turns out. That point is nice and central and meets up perfectly with the bottom of the shield itself, and this is a really easily replicable method to get this done again. There has been a small amount of bleed with the yellow onto the blue underneath the masking tape, so I think next time I need to make sure that I really press that down firmly, but other than that, that would not be too hard to clean up at all. Next up is going to be the toes. Now I have an idea for this where I want all these toe armor pieces to be chevron hazard stripes, and I've never done a chevron pattern before, so it's time to try and figure out how to do it. First, I got everything base coated in yellow because black is going to be easier to go over the top of this. Next up, I have got a really thin 3mm masking tape here, as well as a thicker one which I'm going to use as a divide. So the idea is I'm going to create the chevron pattern on one side first, and then I'm going to try and line that up and replicate it on the other side. So the first step in doing that is to match up the pencil lines that I've made with the masking tape to try and divide this as perfectly central as possible. From here I can now start applying the thinner masking tape in strips going all the way down. Now what I am doing to get my first line initially is using these two rivets here as a guide. I'm going from the top of one down to the bottom of another, then pushing it into the crevice created by that trim, trying to keep it as straight as possible. Now that we've got our first one down, this is going to make it nice and simple to follow along and to keep the same angle with all the chevrons to get the uniformity that makes it look really visually appealing. So this was a bit of a long process, to be honest. It was nice and fiddly and you just sort of had to sit there and do it. But once it was done, it was really satisfying to peel off every other one, and they're going to be the ones that we'll be painting black. So just like before, we left it a good while to make sure that paint was really nice and dry before satisfyingly peeling all of this back and seeing the first half of our progress. Next up, just to make sure that I was on track again, although I'd be lining the masking tape back up with the same rivets on the opposite side that I did to start with, I'm going to be marking where the top points of these chevrons are with a pencil. That way I can just make sure that I am following a loose guide and that they should all line up neatly at the end. Black applied, we can now peel off the other masking tape and see just how well we've done, and they've lined up pretty well. It does look to be slightly off-center unfortunately, but I reckon I could do a better job next time of lining it up. That being said, this does make me wonder whether or not transfers might be easier to get this done. On to my next experiment then, and this is one that did really not end up going according to plan, but I was still actually happy with how the end result came out. So I would like to try and do a checkered board pattern on one side of this knee. It's something that I've seen across quite a few Titans and Knights, and I just really like the look of it. So I started off trying to replicate this by using the masking tape. So like before, I used the rivets on the trim to line up a piece of masking tape. Then I could use that as my guide for all other pieces of the masking tape to follow along. Once they were applied, I then took off each consecutive one. That would give me this first half of the pattern that I need. Next, we're now coming over the top of that, just in the opposite direction. Again, using the rivets to best line up that we can to get our first guide. I did have to do a little bit of playing about with this before I was really happy with the right angle, just to make sure that they met at a 90 degree. Otherwise, the pattern just wouldn't look right at the end result. Now what my simple brain hasn't figured out yet is that this would not give me a checkered board pattern. This is instead just going to give me a diamond pattern with negative space in between it. Checkerboard pattern of course touches up to each other, and this does not. I wouldn't however say that this has been a wasted endeavour. I do quite like the way that this looks, and I reckon if all of that trim was filled in and then we put some weathering over the top of it as well, that would actually really pop as a pattern. Next up, we're going to move on and try and do some celestial patterns. Now, I wanted to see how that night blue from earlier went over the top of a white primer instead of a grey, and I'm still really not happy with it. It just doesn't cover right, it's got a weird finish to it, and now I'm really sort of rethinking going down the blue route. But we're going to persevere for this next test. Using the masking tape, I'm going to create a negative space that I'm then going to fill in with white paint, and this should hopefully be the start of our constellation pattern. However, when removing the masking tape, we can see that this just didn't really work well at all. There was a lot of paint bleed underneath the masking tape, so I think it's time to give this a second try, but this time we're going to be a lot more careful in getting that masking tape really pressed down to the surface. And again, this just didn't really work too well. I don't know whether or not I'm using some kind of cheap masking tape. It's probably more than likely, but just there was so much bleed through that it would take too long to correct. So I'm going to abandon that idea. Next up then is the Shin Armour. I've got some ideas for some decals on this, but first I want to have another go at doing a hazard stripe, but this time I want it nice and big, covering the whole section. So repeating the same process as before, we've primed it with white and now we're going over the top with moon yellow. I'm coming in and now this time I can afford to use the thickest masking tape that I've got, putting it at a sort of 45-degree angle or thereabouts close enough. I can build up my other layers of masking tape and then take off each alternating one, prime with black, and finally do a peel reveal. Now, I did unfortunately get some water on this as it was drying. I was cleaning up my airbrush and just not being careful enough, so that has caused a little bit of that black to bleed underneath the masking tape, but I'm happy with that. I think we've got a good idea now all about doing hazard stripes. So moving on, I had an idea that I wanted to try and make my own decals for this. Now, just to save you a very long story, it took me too long to figure out that you just cannot print white. So instead what I've done here is I've made some light grey symbols, and I want to see how these transfer onto the model. Now, a big mistake that I did make at this stage is that I should have put a varnish over the top of this transfer sheet. That would have given them a lot more stiffness and made them a lot easier to work with, because I do end up having quite a bit of difficulty with this. Now, to help on my decal journey, I needed something sharper than a craft knife. So I went ahead and I bought a surgical scalpel. And let me tell you, if a craft knife is a super soaker, this is one of those riot water cannons. This thing is not to be messed about with at all. I'm generally really scared of slipping and catching myself with this because it'll go through me like no tomorrow. I've been experimenting with this knife for a little bit now, and I will say it is such an upgrade over a craft knife, but if you get one, be bloody careful. Now, because I wasn't able to print white, I tried to get as light as I could of a grey as possible to see how that would react against the blue. Unfortunately, I don't have access to a really fancy graphical printer that will enable me to print white, so I tried to experiment with just a way that I could do it on a regular laserjet. And let me tell you, it's just not really possible doing it this way. I spent a lot of time just messing about trying to make it work when I really should have just been focusing on other things. But it has given me now an idea for moving forward with it. Now, testing it out here, I just wanted to see how the lightness would have worked against the blue and the yellow, and you just cannot see it at all due to the way that printers print, which is something called dithering. It only puts down dots of a colour and uses the white background of the paper to shine through to create that brightness. Obviously, we don't have that white here, so it just doesn't work at all. What I did end up having more success on though is the white part of the shin from earlier. So this grey contrasted quite nicely against it. It's only about a 10% opacity in Photoshop, so it's not that dark at all, but we can really start to see how this might work. Unfortunately though, here you can start to see the result of not gloss varnishing this piece of paper before starting to cut out the transfers. It was just so flimsy, I could not work with it at all, so I just ended up having to scrap it. What I next wanted to experiment with was some of the letters that I'd printed off on this, and I actually quite like how these are starting to work. We can see here I've got one that's printed off as a dark black. That works so much better, so I think I'm going to come back to this transfer idea, mainly just making it entirely black, and this is making me now rethink that I want a potentially yellow and white theme to this with a lot of black accents all over it. That way I can now make my custom decals how I want them, and I'm not going to get any of the trouble that I've had for not being able to print white. So to test out this yellow and white idea, I'm going to come back to one of these shields from before. First of all, I'm going to need to replicate the pattern that I did previously because I quite like the way that that's turned out. It's a direction I can see myself using on the final model, and I also want to test just how easily replicatable this process was from earlier. After thankfully having no issue with that at all, the next step is I want to have a go at painting the gold trim on it just to get more of an idea of how this might look at the end. Now that the trim is dried, let's try using some real transfers. I've been given a load of transfer sheets by Morghammer, so what I want to do is just pick out all the things I find across these multiples of sheets, just anything that looks cool, and start layering these up in a design that could look vaguely Imperium. Now this was a pretty fun process, just taking a look at the transfer sheets, trying to figure out what might look good, and then just getting stuck in with it. What I think I'm going to do is take a good look online to find some custom, professionally made transfers as well that are designed to go on something this size. I do have a little lead of someone who can make some stuff, but they're based out in Japan, so that is going to take a little bit of time obviously to order and then get to the UK. So I've got a few little things to weigh up. I'm hopefully going to be able to find something that's more UK based, but after having a little play around with our transfer sheet, this is what I ended up with, and to be fair, I was pretty happy with how much I could get out of just some simple symbols. So I think I'll be keeping this one as a shield option for it. So to round things off then, I just want to have a go at fixing the paint mistakes from earlier on the hazard stripes, both on the shin as well as the chevrons on the toe armor as well. These are just going to be things I'm going to be experiencing when I come to replicate this across more of them, and thankfully it's not too much trouble to do. So, after what started off as quite a successful project with very minor hiccups, it has all come tumbling down at a really simple stage of just print failures, as well as not getting the right colours, wasting far too much time trying to design decals that didn't work, and just in general having a little bit of a failed time with it. But now that we've got all of these struggles out of the way, I've got a really clear direction of where we're going next with it. I'm glad that I've taken the time at this stage to come to all of these realizations, because if I was further down in the process and then started to hit all of these hiccups, it just would have made it so much more difficult in trying to get a final result out. I was unsure about putting this video out, but I think it's important to show that this just isn't a smooth process. It is entirely organic, and to also just document sort of the failures that go along the process as well. It's all well and good just showing everything being hunky-dory, but there is just a lot of stuff that goes on behind the scenes where I'm constantly thinking of things, trying them out, and unfortunately, like today, they just don't always work. So all that's left for me to do then is to wrap this up by saying thank you ever so much for watching. If you like the video, please drop a like down below, and if you're not already, subscribe. It really helps out the channel. So thank you guys, and I will see you in the next one where we're going to be having a lot more success.